Brought to you by your daddy.
All right, so you ready to dive into something fascinating? It's happening in Malaysia right now, and you might have even seen the headlines about it. It involves that YouTuber, what's his name? iShowSpeed. You know the one.
Yeah, vaguely. I haven't really watched him, but I know there was some kind of controversy when he was in Malaysia.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. But it's bigger than just some, viral internet moment. You know what I mean?
But definitely. These things are never just surface level, are they? There's always more to uncover.
Okay, so for those who, maybe missed this whole thing, iShowSpeed, he's a huge gaming YouTuber. Yeah. And he went to Malaysia, and, well, it caused quite a stir.
Yeah, stir is putting it mildly. I saw something about a near riot. That's intense.
Yeah, things got pretty wild.
You know, the article we're looking at today calls it a potential sign of an unhealthy obsession with international figures. And I don't know about you, but that phrasing kind of made me sit up and pay attention.
Totally. Unhealthy obsession. Whoa. And I mean, look, every country has its own version of crazy fandom. Don't even get me started on the way some Japanese youth are obsessed with American streetwear brands.
Over their own designers. Yeah, it's a thing. But this whole iShowSpeed situation in Malaysia, it kind of shines a light on a bigger issue, doesn't it? Like how a culture values its own talent versus global stars.
Totally. And what I found fascinating was that, according to the article, a lot of these fans going crazy for iShowSpeed, they didn't even really know who he was. They were just caught up in the hype, you know? The fear of missing out was real.
Oh, absolutely. FOMO is a powerful, powerful thing. But the article goes deeper than just that initial reaction, thankfully. It gets into the historical context, which I think is essential for understanding this. For example, decades of colonial rule, with Western culture always being positioned as superior. That leaves a mark, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. It gets ingrained in a culture, that whole imported equals better mentality. Man, it's everywhere, even today. Even something as simple as the way some ads are phrased still pushes that idea, like a foreign product is just inherently superior.
It's subtle, but so pervasive, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's particularly concerning is how the article talks about local Malaysian artists. They face not just apathy, but sometimes real negativity.
Seriously.
It's like there's almost a suspicion of anyone who achieves success just on a national level. Like it counts for less.
That's wild to me. Especially because Malaysia has such a rich artistic heritage, so it makes you wonder, is this purely a product of that colonial legacy the article talked about? Or is there something else going on here? Because the article does seem to land on this idea of a cultural inferiority complex.
Right, inferiority complex.
I have thoughts on that term.
I don't know, it's like throwing around a term like inferiority complex, it feels kind of, I don't know, maybe a little too simple. Like it's a complex issue, right?
You hit the nail on the head. It's definitely not that straightforward. I will say, though, the article makes a really interesting point about how even today, that legacy of colonialism is kind of perpetuated in a way.
Okay, yeah, how so? So they talk about the media landscape in Malaysia, and they make this point that it's almost like a feedback loop, where international figures, they get amplified constantly. And it reinforces this idea that they're just inherently more important, more worthy of attention. And it creates this situation where local talent really struggles to break through all that noise.
Oh, totally. It's like we are what we consume, right? If we're constantly being shown, I don't know, just bombarded with all this stuff that elevates the foreign and kind of pushes down the local, that's got to have an impact.
100%. And then this whole iShowSpeed thing, it's like this weird litmus test for all of this. Oh. And the article even suggests that, hey, maybe this is a turning point.
Wait, hold on. You're saying this whole near riot situation with iShowSpeed, that could actually lead to something positive?
Well, here's what they point out. The sheer volume of discussion that this event sparked, even just the fact that people are debating the value of local talent, the fact that they're questioning this tendency to put these international figures on a pedestal, that in itself is significant.
I see what you mean. Even if not everyone agrees, just the fact that these conversations are happening at all and on a larger scale, that's kind of a big deal. But, I mean, will it actually lead to anything? Will we see any real shifts because of it?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, the article doesn't pretend to have all the answers, and I certainly don't. But it did get me thinking. Even if, let's say, this iShowSpeed thing kind of fades away, it sparked a conversation about the things we value, not just in Malaysia, I mean, everywhere.
That's what I find so fascinating about this whole thing. It's like this weird microcosm of this much larger conversation about cultural identity, wouldn't you say? How do we navigate the global versus the local? What do we choose to celebrate and wow?
Exactly. And you know what? I think that's a conversation worth having on a personal level, too.
Yeah.
Have you ever caught yourself just automatically assuming something imported is better? Oh, it's got to be Italian leather. It's got to be, you know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. I used to be such a snob about coffee. I'm embarrassed to admit. I was like, oh, it's got to be from some fancy Italian roaster or it's not worth drinking. And then I found this little coffee shop, like right down the street from me, run by this woman who roasts all her own beans. It blew my mind. And I was like, oh my God, what have I been missing? It totally changed my perspective.
I love that. It's such a good example of how expanding your definition of what's valuable can open up these whole new worlds of experience.
For real. And maybe that's kind of the lesson of this whole iShowSpeed situation on a larger scale. It's not about like rejecting outside influences altogether, but just recognizing the value of what's already there right in front of us.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. And what's interesting is that the article, it takes a step further. They actually say that it's not even just about entertainment, like who we idolize, what music we listen to, all of that. They say it actually goes deeper than that.
Oh, in what way?
Well, they argue that this whole thing, this tendency to overlook local talent in favor of the international, it speaks to something about a nation's sense of self, their place in the world. And that's something that resonates way beyond just Malaysia. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. It makes you think about all the amazing things that different cultures bring to the table that just get overshadowed or totally undervalued because they don't fit into whatever the dominant narrative is at the moment.
100%. And that's where things get, I think, really interesting. The article ends with this line. It's really thought-provoking. They say that Malaysia is afraid to see the greatness in ourselves, which is a powerful statement on its own. But I don't know about you, it struck me as something kind of universal, too.
Yeah. No, it's definitely haunting. And it does make you think. It's like we get so busy, all of us, looking outward, chasing after the next big thing, whatever that is, that we forget to appreciate the great stuff that's already there.
Yeah.
Within ourselves, within our communities.
It's easy to get caught up in that, right? Especially in a globalized world, like you were saying before, comparing ourselves, measuring our worth against these external standards that maybe don't even really matter.
It's like we become obsessed with what everyone else is doing, what everyone else is into, and we lose sight of our own unique thing,
And I think that's what this article is challenging us to really examine. Not to, like, shut ourselves off from the world or anything, but finding that balance, that healthy respect for both the global and the local.
Right, right. But that's easier said than done. Like, how do we actually do that? How do we break free from those patterns, those assumptions that imported automatically means better? It's so ingrained,
It's a great question. And honestly, I don't think the article pretends to have all the answers, but it does get you thinking. And I think, for me, it starts with awareness. Like, just noticing those subtle biases we all have, those moments where we find ourselves automatically valuing something just because of where it came from, rather than, what it actually is.
It's about being aware of our blind spots, basically.
Exactly. And once you start to see those blind spots, you can start asking those questions like, okay, why am I valuing this thing over that thing? Is it because it's actually better? Or is it just the hype? Am I buying into something?
So it's about being a more conscious consumer, not just of like products, but of culture in general.
Yes, exactly. It's like, what are you consuming and why? What are the messages you're internalizing about what's good, what's valuable, and how are those messages maybe shaping your own perceptions, your own choices?
That's a lot to think about, but I think that's a good note to end on, honestly. This whole iShowSpeed thing, it might have started with like a crazy internet moment, but it brought up some really interesting stuff, things we all deal with. So, yeah, cultural identity, colonial legacies, the power of media, the allure of the other. Sometimes those weird internet things, they make you think about the big stuff.
They really do.
Right.
And maybe if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's that question the article leaves us with. What greatness are we overlooking just because it doesn't fit into our, our preconceived notions of what matters?
Yeah, that is a good question. That's something I'll definitely be thinking about, for sure.
It's a good one. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this deep dive into the heart of Malaysian culture.
Absolutely. Thanks for diving in with us, everybody. And we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.